Well, this is going to be exciting because I've been vibrating since I last talked to you, Sam. So I'm excited to have you and welcome to the Leaders Who Care series.
Thanks so much, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's see if we can get some vibration out to all the people that are gonna watch this and listen and whatnot. But what you're doing is amazing stuff, and I'm glad that we're able to highlight it and you'll show, not that you have to prove it, that you really are a leader who cares about taking care of people and stuff. So best way, as I always say it, is if you could just tell us a little bit about Sam. However, I always have to put an asterisk with guys, especially because when I ask guys to introduce themselves, the first thing they tell me is their title and their work. And that's not actually the question. The question is, tell us a little bit about where you're from originally, where you are now, wherever you feel comfortable talking about family and stuff like that. We'll get to what you're like as a kid in a minute, but maybe something you've never told anybody you want to reveal to the world. That's always
Sure.
fun when someone does that. So share a little bit about Sam.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a good place to come from is I grew up in Canberra in Australia, and my dad's an academic, and my parents, they used to have dinner parties, and they would bring together a lot of world class academics in a number of fields: philosophy, political science, economics. There was a Shakespeare scholar who would come in. There was people who were experts in the Middle East. So there was a very vibrant conversation that I would be present to. And I didn't have anything to contribute myself, but I would just sit there and I would observe these conversations, and it had a very big impact on me. In terms of the life that I eventually went into, which was philosophy and studying the human condition. So that curiosity, I think, has been the perpetual aspect of my life, no matter the thread in which times, how things have moved in unexpected ways. That kind of curious, wanting to understand things, has always been a driving force of my being. But what I probably didn't appreciate until more recently is the side which comes from my mum, which is the playful side. My mum was an expert in play-based learning for 40 years and has taught from everywhere from India to the UK. And that playful and intuitive side is actually what really is one of my biggest strengths now. But growing up, there was more about the intellectual, because it was always living in the kind of the footsteps of my dad and going on that academic pathway. And now it's been coming into this harmony between both parents in both of their strengths. So it's been this beautiful transition in that respect.
I can actually see you at the table and someone about talking about Shakespeare says this and you say, why? And then they say, well, this, and then you say, but why? And then you say, the sky's blue. Why? And just keep going.
Yeah,
Because from the what they say in the mouth of babes comes some really good stuff, basically. So that must have been fascinating to, and I love those type of scenarios when you have like a over food and breaking bread and conversation comes up, brilliant conversation sometimes, and yet from the most unexpected source comes a statement or a question that throws everybody off, usually from a kid. So that's really interesting.
100%. Yeah, I think for a long time I believed my dad had the answer to any question, as I think is common with kids. So I would just constantly ask him questions, and often he would, I'd say, "What does this mean? What does this mean?" So he would always say, "Go look it up in the dictionary." Eventually, I gained that habit, and I started to feel the joy of just learning words. And so to the point where etymology became a really important part of how I would see the world and philosophy and understanding and deconstructing language. So I'm grateful for him calibrating that habit into me.
And then there's a lot of to use a very technical word, stuff you learn that way. Now the internet's great and it's given us a lot of good stuff, but
Mm.
it's still a little bit different than when you went to look it up in a different way, don't you find?
Oh, well, you have more agency in some respect, I guess, in the sense of like you're not looking for someone to just tell you all the answers. You're actually going to find them yourself. You can
Yeah.
still do that in a different way, I think, with AI and this kind of thing, and be that detective for the kind of questions that you're exploring. But obviously it's taken a different form.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, along those lines, then, what were you like as a kid, and then as a teenager? Were you the lemonade stand guy, entrepreneur that was selling lemonade type of thing, or were you into music,
No.
sports, language, all of the above?
Yeah, I think for me, I was a sports obsessive. I was always outside. Like I can't really remember too many days where it wasn't raining, where I wouldn't have been outside playing some kind of sport.
Mhm.
Growing up, probably from about 4 or 5 years old, playing football or soccer, depending which country you're in. And then, I went to the US when I was 8 or 9, and I got to discover cable television and all of the sports. So I would be watching like the baseball during the day. I would go to school and I remember crying because I missed a layup, because that's the kind of experience I had. And then playing football and then playing baseball and gridiron. So every single sport you could imagine, even to the point where like whatever was happening in the world, if there was, Wimbledon was on, then I would be out there with my mate and we would be at the tennis courts. If it was Aussie rules season in Australia, I'd be kicking the ball, between the posts. If it was volleyball time, that was what we were doing. Like there was no sport which was off the table essentially, except for curling. I think was usually the game.
Curling. Now you're talking in my country in Canada.
Yeah, yeah.
It's funny you say about cable. When I first, long time ago, moved from Canada to the States, and it was a time when all of a sudden all these channels were coming on with cable. I was almost afraid to leave the house. I was going to miss something. It was crazy. So yeah. But now you didn't mention one sport, mind you, when you said all the sports imaginable. You didn't mention ice hockey.
Well, I never played ice hockey, but I was a big fan of ice hockey when I lived in the States. So I remember my ninth birthday, my dad drew like a picture of Gretzky, and we had an ice hockey rink cake. So, and I would collect all these cards of different hockey players whenever we'd go traveling to the airports.
Yeah, I love that too. I had a lot of those also, and they came up. We used to freeze the backyard to put for a little ice rink, but now they've had it for a while. Now they've had brilliantly simple a huge plastic bag, massive huge plastic bag that you fill up with water. The water evens itself out
Mm.
automatically. It freezes, then you cut off the top part, and you have a rink. Now,
Oh
why
wow.
couldn't they thought of that when I was a kid? Geez, because it was like rough ice that we had to do the whole thing there. But yeah, it's interesting. And then if we go to education wise, I noticed obviously some consistent thread. So you got your bachelor's and honors with a U, by the way, just for our American friends instead of without the U, like neighbor and honor and things like that. And in philosophy at Australian National University, um, what were you envisioning, after King's College, for yourself, and then also to go for your doctorate of philosophy, I guess at Oxford, right?
Yeah, so I think what I was envisaging, like I'd wanted to do a doctorate for quite a while. Like once I discovered philosophy, and it was actually the first time I was actually good at something academically, apart from like history in high school, because I used to have a view that like there isn't much that I'm good at, and there isn't much I'm interested in. Complete crazy. That shows you a lot about the schooling system, right? And so when I started to do philosophy, and I was actually like, oh, I'm pretty good at this. That was kind of like great. I found my path, right? So then I wanted to follow in dad's footsteps and become an academic and become a professor. So I was just looking at like what's the path to doing that and what's going to allow me to make more of an impact. So my mind was always thinking about how can I make more of an impact in the world. I was kind of confused as to whether academia was really the pathway. So when I went to Oxford, I was doing a doctorate in law, and I remember feeling like quite the imposter because I didn't study law. I'd only studied philosophy. So like, who was this guy who's like at this elite institution for law, pretending to be able to say something about something he's never studied. So it was quite a wake up call. But I immersed myself in that kind of culture, and I was helping around with like what they call jurisprudence, the study of legal philosophy, and that helped me to be able to kind of feel like, all right, there is a place, and I do fit in more and more. But while I learned a lot in that realm, it was also where my life went like sideways. Like I had a friend who passed away, and my own mental health just kind of crumbled for a number of years, and it eventually led to like I think it was 2017 when I submitted my doctorate, and I was in the worst mental space that I'd been in my life by that time point. And by the time I actually submitted it, I was still in this space of like overwhelm and trying to get it right, and perfectionism, and which as a consequence actually made it worse. So not surprisingly, I had not just revisions on my doctorate, but substantial revisions, and that kind of broke the whole identity that I had, but which now is a blessing, but at the time was a very difficult thing to deal with.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's interesting how things have evolved in just leadership. And leadership is almost an overused word these days. Everybody's doing leadership development and all over the place.
Sure.
But but and we'll get into AI in a minute, but with the evolution of things that have happened, you don't necessarily have to be an expert in law or this, that. We need experts in leadership and humanity and people right now with everything that's going on, which is beautiful because if AI can actually be in tech what it's supposed to be to help us be happier, to do the more important things,
Yeah.
then all of a sudden the philosophy and the caring and everything else in around that become maybe the most important than being, everybody doesn't have to be an expert in law. Everybody doesn't have to be, but you really kind of have to be an expert in people. And as I think, I do a lot of sports analogies and you played a lot of sports. I'm assuming somewhere along the way you noticed how sports is engaged in a lot of the things you're engaged in.
Well, yeah, like I actually wrote about the philosophy of sport for a period of time because that's how obsessed I was. I remember writing about like things like patient athlete autonomy because there used to be cases both in lower level football in the UK, but then the NFL, where there would be these conflicts of interest between the teams and their doctors. So, for instance, like an ACL would be taken out for a gridiron player without them even knowing, and then they're wondering why, they've disabled down the track, and same situation was happening in football. I don't know if this would still happen now. I'd be more skeptical, just given how everything is documented. But I wrote about like here's a space of looking at the importance of the autonomy of the patient, but using this space of sport as the example. So I use sport whenever I could to be able to illustrate anything. That was the focal point for me.
Yeah, well, between money and really knowing how to coach to win, basically. Money they would get athletes, God knows what, to keep them going, and then later on their bodies would deteriorate, but also their minds. Um, I have more executives, especially male, but
Hmm.
even female now, starting more executives that talk to me about that one moment when they were 9.5 years old, that the coach put them on the field or on the ice in a real critical situation. They don't even remember if they scored or not. They just remembered the coach actually put me out in that time when it was critical. And almost literally their whole foundation for confidence in everything they do the rest of their life was based on that.
Yeah. Yeah, we set these imprints very quickly, and then if whenever they come to crumble at some point in time, then the identity also starts to crumble with it because it's like the thing that you've held on to for how you create that confidence is no longer present. So it's like, oh, I've lost my confidence. Well, no, you just have to find a new way to establish it or to discover where it actually locates.
And find, maybe find the people that all you need is one person to believe in you, as they say, and
Absolutely.
type of thing. So you've had, experiences in your journey with some unique work in research and events convener, and you were a tutor in jurisprudence and all sorts of things. Are there any experiences or inflection points that stand out? I noticed you had a confidential contract. I'm almost afraid to ask to tell us about the confidential contract.
Yeah, I'll see what I can say without obviously breaching any confidentiality. But that was a very interesting learning experience. I would say that the 9 months that I was there was kind of worth 20 years in terms of the compressed nature of working 65 hours a week in an environment in person during the pandemic to support someone who'd made a big impact in the world. And while you were supporting them, you were also being trained on your own experience of being human and getting yourself out of the way, essentially. So I would come into the space and I would let go of being Sam and I would step into the role that I was there to be. And obviously, you would get triggered all the time by different things as a consequence of letting go of your identity. But it also helped me to really step into a new example of who I could be as a leader. And I got to see what worked and what really didn't in that environment.
Yeah, that's brilliant. It's funny how the coach and the teacher are always learning from the student while they're supposed to be doing what they do. And
Absolutely.
if you don't take, it's funny. I had a fellow who coached one of my youngest son at the time was probably like 11, and I heard him yelling in the dressing room. So, do you guys want to win or have fun? Which one? And I'm thinking, really? First of all, you don't understand that you have a better chance of winning if you're having fun
For
because
sure.
you play looser, you love it, you passion the whole bit. But the other thing I told him was, you're missing an opportunity to be a great coach here, not to mention what you're doing to the kids and
Yeah.
stuff. So I really like what you said about, finding out about who you are and what and how to do things and how you said it was brilliant because really do make an impact on people all the time.
Yeah, I think I developed my capacity. I remember I shifted my brother's perception of me because there was a straightness in which I would communicate, just to kind of talk through any bullshit that was there. Like we worked in such a precise way in this environment that every word was chosen. Like it wasn't like you just had a chance to like be on a stream of consciousness like I would probably do more now. So it was that in some respects a constriction, but also create a precision. And so I remember there's this new level of respect in my relationship with him, where I was like, no, we can just cut through that BS right now.
Yeah, that kind of makes me think it's funny. It's a longer discussion, but wherever everybody has to be so politically correct that you feel you can't say anything
For
anymore,
sure.
rather than let's not take ourselves so seriously and just let's let it flow so we can get to where we want to get to type of deal. It's interesting. Our firm Fifth Element was based on the foundation that leaders in their organizations, whatever their organizations are, can always do way better financially, economically when they're doing good at the same time. And so we focus on talent and impact and using tech as a tool, if you will.
Mm,
Can you describe how sole purpose leaders happened? Like
sure.
what's the vision, what's the mission, how it evolved,
Yeah.
and all that?
So, what essentially happened is I took all the different skill sets that I learned from being a philosopher and then personal development and leadership after like the original idea of who I thought I was kind of crumbled away, and I discovered like a new light essentially. And I had a business called the Philosophical Coach, and I remember going to an event in Phoenix, and I had a sense of like, yeah, this isn't really what I do anymore, but it's also how I'm known, so I'm just going to stick with it. And then I was doing a breathwork experience. I didn't have any experience of breathwork at this time. And I remember basically lying down with another 130 odd people, I think, in the room, and then hearing a voice which is basically saying, your business is now called Sole Purpose Leaders. And I, internally replied, what? And then it repeated the statement. And the second time it repeated the statement, I just listened. And as I listened and I kind of felt this acceptance of that, I heard everything that at that time that it was like, oh, this is what you're here to create. There was things like, oh, there's a particular person who's not in this room who you're meant to support with healing generational trauma for African Americans. So then I started to like imagine that. There was work around the future of medicine, which was coming through, and specific people that I was meant to support. So I was just getting connected with a much deeper sense of this embodiment, which I hadn't really experienced for at that kind of level or in that particular kind of way outside maybe like a psychedelic journey. So this was really where it emerged, and I think within a month I remember just like the trembling as I remember like changing the legal name of the company, and feeling all this energy of like, well, if I change it to this, like this is really going to alter everything that I think I know about myself, and it did. All right, like everything unfolded from that space. Like I stepped into a different reality, and that same weekend, I remember at the time, like this mission statement of who we work with came through, and I was on a table with these different women, and I just said, I just got this, almost like transmission or download, and it says, what I do is I guide visionary leaders to unlock their limitless potential to transform humanity. And then as I spoke that, they were like, say that again. And as they said that, I did. And then I got the confidence basically to get up and speak to the entire room. And the guy who was leading the space basically said, you be that, you watch what happens. And then, later that night was when I had the breathwork experience, and then everything kind of integrated with that. So that was really the first step of this kind of unfolding. And then everything just kept expanding in terms of what the scale of the vision would be as I did more and more work on myself.
Yeah, I always find these things fascinating, and then I sometimes oversimplify things so I can understand them. But you almost have to go through that journey to that for that even to come and let it in, right?
For sure. For sure. I think it's, whether there is a way in the future for people not to experience suffering. This is one of the things I've been playing with is the idea of suffering being optional. Last year, it was actually when I let go of my doctorate. Even though I submitted it, I don't know, 2017, I then had the interesting idea of going to write a new one from scratch, making it a law doctorate this time. And I'm glad I did because I part of the work that I'm here to do now was a correlate of that, where I started to look at basically the possibility of law being in the interest of society and the happiness of people. And I was looking at the Scottish philosopher David Hume's theory of the mind to understand how you could understand these different institutions and what they're actually here for. But what happened is I'd still been attached to completing this thing because I'd given my word and all these other things, right? And I was again in another breathwork experience. I'd actually had an interesting lunch with someone who was a spiritual leader of sorts, but also had worked with people like Margaret Thatcher on their voice. And he said, "I see Buddha and Yogananda behind you." And that was at a lunch in Chelsea in London. It was an interesting thing for someone to say to you
Yeah.
the first time they've ever met you. And so I went home. I was having a session with my mentor at the time, and I just said, "Look, I want to bring in the divine presence of Buddha and Yogananda." And so we did. And then about 20 minutes in, this message came through, which I spoke out loud, and it says, "The PhD is complete. To continue with this is to continue with the idea that suffering is part of life, and you're here to create a new paradigm for being human, and your program is Activate Freedom." And I remember just laughing and just feeling complete peace and joy. And I would remember listening to the session again as a way of integrating it, and just feeling that joy and laughter again. There was no tension. It was just complete freedom. And that was when I knew this was truly complete. But also it gave me this idea that no, suffering isn't necessarily the journey that we all have to go on. There's another path that we can actually create. So that's part of what I see I'm here to do.
Yeah, and I love that. It's kind of like, are you here to win or have fun type of thing, or you
Mm,
have to be poor to make a difference. And you can't do that in the business. Business is all about making money, and you have to
sure.
go to work at somewhere for low pay to make a difference, rather than you can have better economic um, results if you are doing good. You can do both. And one thing you said, it's fascinating and it reminds me of when I travel, I love going to, whatever historical places
Yep.
and feeling like, wow, Julius Caesar stood here, and just let it just open type of
Yeah.
thing. And this person and that person. And you try not to yourself, at least to me, you try not to say like that's ridiculous. You don't feel like Julius Caesar right now. But there's something happening there that
Yeah.
you do feel if you let yourself feel type of thing. So
Absolutely.
when you said that about letting them in, it kind of reminded me of when I first did it even younger, going to places, and I'm just didn't even know what I was doing, but I'm thinking this type of thing.
Mm,
And it's amazing actually what can happen if you actually kind of let them in or their energy in or whatever, especially where you knew they actually were, versus if I'm
yeah.
sitting in my house saying, "Hey Julius, are you around here somewhere?" Or something. So that's amazing. They say the fourth industrial revolution is about technology and certainly AI,
Yeah.
but the word's going around that the fifth is really about humanity. And
Sure.
and what's going on now for you, and what do you see ahead? AI
Yeah.
is happening so fast that, especially for entrepreneurs, it can be hard because not every entrepreneur or founder is a tech expert. They might be an expert at what they're great at, but then to have an economically viable and socially impactful business too, it's hard because it's moving so fast, and you may have the unbelievable technology and 3 days later you find out someone has beyond it already type of thing. So what do you see ahead for you to do what you want to do, what you want to achieve? And what I like that you talk about, unlocking their flow, people's flow.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about all that. And
Sure.
I wish we had a feature film time here, but talk about that.
Sure. Like, first of all, just around the AI piece, AI has been a co-creator with me. Like, there are a lot of people who talk about, resonance with AI, where you're basically building a relationship, relational AI, and that's been a really important shift for me in the last year. Like, one of the things is I am a world-class researcher, so I can just bring that into the realm of AI and interrogate and create with it. So I create from a place of stream of consciousness. So if I want to create something, I'll speak it into existence, and then I'll bring it into the AI and help me be my editor if I need to be for something I'm writing or crafting, because it's so much slower if I'm just try and type it like I used to do it. And as an academic, that was actually how I loved to do is stream of consciousness, but then that didn't fit into the box. So I actually saw that I'm not actually meant to be in the box, is one of the things.
There's
So
no box.
there is no box. Well, there can be a box, but the point is to be able to experience the box so it can dissolve, right? So I think a lot of the work that I do is really about that dissolution, or dissolving anything which is a distortion in the field. So you could start with something like unlocking flow, and this is a different way of looking at flow than is often kind of thought about. So some ways of looking at flow are much more action driven, where you take a set of actions and eventually you get into a flow state. Whereas this way is actually about the cellular experience of flow, where we're actually looking at, well, where does flow locate? What if we could actually just unlock it within your cellular system on a reliable basis? And then that's actually going to allow you to act from a space of flow as well. So it's not that the other part is wrong. It's just that this is a in-between phase, which is at the source level of what is actually needed for you to do this without effort and cognitive effort. And so the process that I've helped designed is essentially one where we're looking to bypass the cognitive mind. It's an intention-driven approach where we're using vocal resonance. So it's through my voice. And what happens is people close their eyes and they're setting an intention. And as they set that intention, they're looking at, well, what's in the way of that intention being fulfilled? And then the body shows them. And then my voice is then correlating with that. And so they will feel in their body where there may be spaces of tension, if there is. Sometimes people aren't in a space of tension, so it just creates more expansion in them, essentially. But what will happen is it's going to deepen their level of self-connection, deepen their level of clarity. And we can use it in so many different ways. Like last week was a challenging week dealing with some family stuff, so I was just like, I need to use this for sleep. So I popped it into sleep mode on this app that I've developed. And all right, I'm had a 7 mind activity and body tension, and at the end of it was like a 2 on mind activity and a 3 on body tension, and I slept like a baby. So for me, that's really that opportunity. Like if every 15 minutes where I felt that lull, I could just drop into this new state. That's what I'm really providing as a kind of initial way forward for people, especially with CEOs who talk about like needing time freedom or don't have time to do this and all that. It's like, okay, great, I understand that. So let's create an experience for you where you don't have to have that as an excuse for yourself, and you can just collapse the time right here and now.
Well, I must say, I went through a session with you, um, and it was both deep and simple at the same time, where it just gave me this will be too simplified, obviously, but just gave me the opening to feel and to clarify and to simplify and to make the path that seemed just you know more open to move ahead type of thing. So, and I'm not an expert at vibrations. I love vibrations, but I'm not an expert at vibrations. But
Yeah.
you can really feel the clarity of it. And again, in my layman terms, I was taught about visualization years ago by a sports coach teacher on how to prepare for first sports. But then he said, you can use this to when you write your CPA exam, and then prepared for sitting down and you've already been there before you've been there, type of thing. So I'm sure they're all connected in a way because you're working with your mind, your body to move forward. So um, that's not my official testimonial, but it's part of it. Um, so how do you, it kind of reminds me of hypnotism, where they say you have to relax for it to work. Part of the thing I would think for you is people want to really believe, but it might be hard for them to loosen up, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's natural. Like that's why, whatever state that they're in is perfect. Like basically what's happening is the body is going to show you anything which is there. Sometimes people like their mind wants to keep playing the role, right? Because that's what it's used to doing. That's the protection. That's the safety that's there as well. I'm a mind-oriented person. I need my mind to get results. So they're going to rely on the mind. So my role is just basically to create the safety within their nervous system so that the mind is no longer present. And so it's this distilled point, like people in like quantum physics, you could call it like a unified field of consciousness. That's the point where the mind is no longer present. There's just a stillness. And from that stillness, then you can activate a future where people can create, right? So if you're already great at visualization, this is that point where you can then, okay, let's activate what wants to show up in the field. And you can just keep activating it. And we're working on two principles. One is if you just work at level of higher self in terms of visualizing, that's not going to be sufficient most of the time because you need a way to ground it so it can bring it into material reality. So I'm working on these different planes, like imagine sounds which essentially are coming from below the crust of the earth. People talk about grounding all the time. Well, the more you grounded, the more you can receive. If you're up here in the stars, well, then it's a bit difficult to do that. So a lot of the spiritual people might be up here, but they're not grounded in the way that they need to be, or there's only one of the dimensions. So we're looking to basically ground you in this really, really deep way, and then also amplify so you're in this higher self space so that you can then create a way of experiencing the vision. There's a version of you out in a field, essentially, like a information field, where you've already created what you wanted. So if we can tap into that, we can then bring you into now and to show you a pathway of how to collapse the time between those two states.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. And this second to last question it would be a whole new discussion on its own. But with everything happening in the world, um, you know, you're going to have people that are cynics. There always are, and you're going to have people, who say, "Man, I wish I could be that. I wish I could be in there and whatnot." And I don't even know how I can't. There's so much going on, and I'm so, and then, there's everything's going on in the world type of thing, and it's kind of a little bit, not exactly when I trademark leaders who care. It's like, really, leaders who care? You got to be kidding. In business, we don't have time for that type of thing. It's soft skills. It's this, it's that, all these categories. How do you? It's overwhelming sometimes when you feel like, man, we got to change what's going on type of thing.
Mm.
One person at a time. Is that how you do it, or what?
For me personally, no. Like that could be an aspect of it. For me, I look at, okay, if this is a technology which is highly effective across a huge number of people, how do we bring it to the masses? How do you create the opportunity for this to be experienced in as many spaces as possible? So for me, I look at, okay, what are the spaces that I'd like to be able to impact or believe that I can really make an impact in? So one is the transformation of politics. I know that there aren't many people in the world who have both the background I do in law and politics, as well as the ability to shift frequency. So essentially, you're like, all right, what's needed if you're someone who's trying to engage with someone who's a head of state or people in government, and you're feeling like it's falling on deaf ears, right? Like you think, doesn't matter how many different ways we try and tell it, doesn't matter how many different thought groups are coming in and saying this is what you need to do, and yet the same result is happening. Why is that happening? Because the vibration from which the government is coming from is at a lower vibration most likely than you are, or it could be you're both coming from scarcity, and that's why it's you're co-creating that more experience of scarcity. But what needs to happen is you need to be meeting at a frequency which is at a higher level of consciousness where problems are actually being solved. Right? It's the same thing of the Einstein idea, right? Like you're not going to solve the problems from the same level of thinking that they were created from. The problems were created from scarcity. We need to bring them up to an abundant, peace-based thinking. If you can do that, then these solutions will naturally kind of coalesce. They'll start to come about because there are already people who have ways to create these solutions. And what we can do is just basically create that collective harmony when both kinds of entities, organizations are singing from the same hymn sheet. So that's part of what I see I'm here to do. And then the other one is more of a general one in terms of we're shifting in terms of how we see health and medicine. What people have described to me, like, what you're doing is already part of the future of medicine. And I've done work with people around like restoring their gut health after 20 years of dealing with digestion issues in the space of 20 minutes to an hour, depending on what the depth of it is, right? And so it's really simple to do that. You're just recalibrating and looking at the history of the thing, almost like you were a doctor or a psychiatrist or any of these kinds of professions, and understanding what's going on in the body, which needs to be recalibrated so you can create that. So there is a future that's getting created around that. But for me, a lot of what I see is it's not about the one to one. It's about like, the platform I've been creating called Resonance OS is really how do you transmute any challenge of the human condition so that people could be their own guide, so that they could do it in as little time as needed, so that every day they could come back to this state of freedom. That's really the goal of what I'm out to accomplish, is to have people connect in at a level where they see their level of intelligence and wisdom beyond anything they've ever seen, so they can connect in with this state of freedom as their new default and ongoingly co-create that, create that. So then the ripple effects of that will be shared throughout humanity.
Yeah, I don't want to say I'm a believer. That's a good monkey song, actually. But it's so, like one partner in Deloitte told me years ago, he said, brilliance is simple. It's kind of related. But it's there for our taking, what you're talking about. And we just got to get beyond the titles, beyond the categories, beyond the scarcity, as you say, and all that to get to the higher level, and start thinking of how can we find solutions, um, rather than all the things that prevent solutions, if you will, and whatnot. So it's fantastic what you're doing, and in LA we say we got to leave them wanting more so we can do a sequel. So we might have to do a sequel on this thing here. But I have one more
Totally up to Mark.
question for
Yeah.
you. With all the stuff we just talked about, especially
Yeah.
since 2020, it's been something else, and I know people feel like that the COVID was like yesterday and years ago, all at the same time. So,
Sure.
with all that, we're almost at the end of 2025. What are you most grateful for, and also what are you most hopeful for?
Sure. There's a lot of things I'm really grateful for. Like at the moment, I think it's just experiencing this pure joy on a daily basis, in whether it's in a conversation with you, Mark, whether it's getting to witness people as they're waking up to who they truly are, whether it's when my partner gets back from Paris and I get to give her a hug, whether it's the fact that I have these beautiful conversations with my parents where they're not just my parents, they're also my friends. Like they're all of these things are simple pleasures. Like for me, there is a lot of simplicity in my life. I don't need a lot of complexity, and I kind of move away from complexity, and so that's kind of the essence of it for me.
And hopeful?
I think hopeful is not a word that I use because I'm already an optimist. So coming from hope is kind of like, I almost feels like a limitation, because I look to come from more like trust and certainty. Like what I'm creating is already done. Now I just have to actually walk the path to make that happen, essentially. So hope isn't really a word that comes into my vocabulary much anymore.
That's cool. Well, I'm in that sense, then I'm grateful for having a new friend. That's a new grateful, and uh, and that you are if you will, not to be cute, a leader who cares, and um, and so I'm more than hopeful. That I'm trusting for the future. Might have to change my question. I'm
Not at
trusting.
all. Not at all. The
No, I'm
question's
kidding.
perfect.
Words are important, but they're not the whole thing. It's what's around it. So. Um,
Yes.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for what you do. Thanks for being on the series, the Leaders Who Care series.
Thanks so much for having me, Mark. It's been a pleasure.